She only meant to cover her sister's shift for one night. Just one harmless favor. But the moment she stepped into the mansion, everything changed. Behind those glittering walls lived a CEO single dad fighting a secret battle for his daughter. A man whose life was about to collide with hers in ways neither could have imagined. And when his little girl whispered something that froze Emma in her tracks, the truth unraveled into a storm of love, loss, and justice that no one saw coming. The heavy rain outside had not stopped since morning, and as the clock struck 6, Emma tightened her thin coat and hurried toward the towering mansion that loomed at the end of the street. The request had come suddenly. Her sister, Clara, had begged her to cover the evening maid shift at the Harlington estate. Clara had sounded desperate on the phone, her voice shaking. Emma had no choice. Family debts, unpaid bills, and the lingering shame of their father's failed business left her little room to say no. When she arrived, the iron gates parted slowly, creaking as though warning her that the world inside was not meant for someone like her. The grand hallway smelled faintly of roses mixed with polished wood, and a chandelier shimmered above, throwing shards of golden light across marble floors. Emma's shoes squeaked, betraying her nervousness. She adjusted her apron, trying to breathe steadily, but her chest tightened with the same old anxiety she always carried, the fear of not belonging. Her hands still smelled of the lavender soap she had used to scrub the kitchen sink earlier that afternoon, a detail that oddly comforted her. She repeated silently, "You're just here for one evening. Nobody will notice you." It was then that she heard footsteps, measured, strong, echoing through the hallway like a gavel striking in a courtroom. When she turned, she saw him. Alexander Harlington, the CEO whose name had appeared in newspapers alongside rumors of corporate lawsuits and boardroom battles, stood at the end of the corridor, tall, broad-shouldered, yet with shadows under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. He was known to be ruthless in business, but now, in the quiet of his own home, there was something undeniably weary about him. His gaze lingered on Emma, not with arrogance, but with a flicker of surprise, as if he had expected someone else. "Clara?" he asked, his voice deep but softened by fatigue. Emma bowed slightly. "I'm Emma, her sister. Clara couldn't come tonight, so I'm covering her shift." His brow furrowed, yet he didn't protest. Instead, he gave a curt nod, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. Emma sensed caution in him, as if trust was a currency he could no longer afford to spend. Before the silence grew unbearable, a small voice echoed down the stairs. "Daddy?" Emma turned and saw a little girl, no more than 7, clutching a stuffed rabbit with worn ears. Her golden hair caught the chandelier's glow, and her eyes, so achingly familiar to Alexander's, sparkled with curiosity. She peeked at Emma with a timid smile, one that carried the fragile hope of a child who had seen too much loss. "This is Sophie," Alexander said, his voice gentler now. "My daughter." Sophie bounded toward Emma, her steps light, her presence softening the tension in the room. She tugged at Emma's apron with innocent wonder. "You smell like flowers," the girl whispered. Emma's throat tightened. It was the lavender soap again, clinging to her skin like an invisible shield. She crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's forehead. "It's just soap," she replied softly. But inside she felt something stir, an unexpected warmth, as though this child had unlocked a part of her heart she had long sealed away. Alexander watched the interaction silently, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, his guarded eyes softened, and Emma caught a glimpse of a man haunted not only by corporate wars, but by loneliness. Flashbacks tugged at Emma's mind as she followed Sophie into the living room to tidy up. She remembered nights spent hiding under the stairs while creditors shouted at her father. She remembered Clara working 2 jobs, her hands raw, while Emma tried to study in a dimly lit room. Trauma had been her silent companion, shaping her into someone who always braced for the next blow, the next betrayal. And now here she was, in a mansion dripping with wealth, standing before a man who seemed just as scarred, though his wounds were hidden beneath tailored suits and expensive silence. As Emma folded blankets and arranged books neatly on a shelf, Sophie nestled close to her, almost as if they had known each other for years. Alexander stood by the fireplace, watching, conflicted. He wanted to intervene, to draw lines, to keep strangers away from his daughter. Yet something in Emma's gentleness disarmed him. When their eyes met across the room, Emma felt an almost imperceptible shift, like a door opening to a path neither of them expected. She didn't know it yet. But this single night, which began as an act of duty for her sister, would entangle her life with his in ways that would test everything she thought she knew about survival, love, and justice. The following evenings blurred into a rhythm Emma had not expected. She continued to cover Clara's shifts, each visit to the Harlington estate pulling her deeper into a world she had once thought unreachable. Sophie greeted her with unguarded joy, always clutching that stuffed rabbit, always asking for a story or a lullaby. And Alexander, though reserved, began to linger in the same rooms, watching Emma with an expression that wavered between suspicion and reluctant trust. There was a tenderness in the way Sophie's laughter filled the vast mansion, something Emma noticed Alexander listened to like a starving man hearing music. Emma's kindness was simple but unshakable. She baked small batches of cookies with Sophie, teaching her to stir the dough until the kitchen filled with the scent of warm vanilla. She mended Sophie's torn dress with steady hands, humming quietly as the little girl leaned against her. These were acts Alexander had rarely seen in his home since his wife's death 3 years earlier. For a man who built empires with contracts and iron resolve, this sudden invasion of softness rattled him. One night, as the rain tapped against the windows, Alexander finally spoke beyond pleasantries. "Why are you here, really? You're not Clara. You're different." Emma's heart pounded, but she answered truthfully. "Clara asked me to cover her shift. She works too much, and I couldn't say no. I didn't plan to be here more than once, but—" "Sophie." She glanced at the child asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling under a knitted blanket. "She makes it hard to leave." For a moment, Alexander's face softened, shadows in his eyes flickering with something Emma recognized: loneliness. Yet the next instant his expression hardened again. "Trust isn't something I give easily, especially now. I can't afford another betrayal." His words echoed in her, pulling memories she had buried. Emma remembered nights her father promised everything would be fine, only to watch their house repossessed. She remembered Clara's silent tears, both sisters clinging to each other when the world abandoned them. Betrayal was a language she spoke fluently, too. As days passed, fragments of Alexander's own trauma slipped into view. A phone call overheard revealed heated arguments with lawyers over a lawsuit threatening his company. Whispers in town suggested that rivals sought to prove him unfit to manage both his empire and his daughter. In rare, unguarded moments, Alexander confided in Emma how his late wife's family had challenged him in court for custody of Sophie, how every boardroom meeting now felt like a battlefield. Emma listened quietly, sensing the weight he carried. Yet she was not just a passive observer. Her eyes sharpened when she noticed documents left on his desk, legal files with names she recognized. One evening, she froze at a familiar surname. Her father's former business partner, the man who had driven their family into ruin, was now linked to Alexander's legal troubles. She tucked this realization away, unsure of whether to speak. Conflict deepened the night Alexander discovered a slip of paper in the kitchen. Clara's handwriting, not Emma's, confirming the shift substitution. His temper flared, anger not at Emma personally, but at the fragile sense of control he thought he had. "You deceived me," he said sharply, though his voice trembled more with fear than rage. "I can't allow people into my daughter's life who won't be honest." Emma's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to deceive you. Clara begged me and I thought it was harmless. If you want me gone, I'll leave. But don't punish Sophie for finding comfort in someone who cares." The words hung heavy in the air, truth piercing through his defenses. For a man accustomed to calculated negotiations, Emma's raw honesty struck him with unusual force. He did not answer immediately, but his silence was not dismissal. It was contemplation. Later that night, as Sophie clung to Emma and whispered, "Promise you'll come back," Alexander stood in the doorway, conflicted. He saw how naturally Emma fit into moments he could not manufacture with wealth. Cookies in the oven, soft songs by the fire, a child's smile without fear. And beneath his guarded heart, something dangerous began to stir. The realization that this woman, who had entered his life by accident, might be the one he needed most. Yet danger lurked closer than either of them knew. Emma's connection to the old business scandal that tied their families together was not coincidence. It was fate. And as the storm outside grew heavier, both Alexander and Emma sensed that the fragile trust building between them would soon be tested by secrets too painful to remain buried. The day of the hearing arrived with the weight of thunderclouds pressing low over the city. Inside the courthouse, the sterile scent of polished oak mixed with the faint aroma of wilted flowers left behind in the hallway vases. Alexander sat stiffly at the defense table, his jaw set, though his hand trembled when he adjusted his tie. Beside him, Sophie clutched her stuffed rabbit with white knuckles, too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense the fear in her father's silence. Across the aisle sat his late wife's family, armed with lawyers eager to prove Alexander unfit to raise his daughter. Documents were piled high, accusations sharper than blades. To them, he was not a father, but a liability. An exhausted CEO buried under lawsuits, too distracted to nurture a child's fragile heart. Emma had not intended to be here. She had promised herself she would stay out of Alexander's storm, that she would retreat quietly back into her own life. But fate had tied their paths too tightly. When she discovered documents linking her father's corrupt former partner to the scheme against Alexander, she knew silence was no longer an option. She stepped into the courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. When she was called to the stand, Alexander's gaze locked onto her. For the first time since they met, his composure cracked. Hope flickered in his eyes, raw and unguarded. Emma testified with a voice that wavered at first, then grew strong as she recounted how her family had been destroyed by the very man now colluding with Alexander's rivals. She revealed hidden transactions, fraudulent ties, and the manipulation that painted Alexander as negligent. Each word she spoke peeled back layers of deceit, exposing truths that silenced the courtroom. But the most shocking twist came when Emma unfolded a letter, an old correspondence her sister Clara had found tucked inside a forgotten file box. It revealed that the fatal accident that took Alexander's wife's life was not mere chance but orchestrated negligence by those same business enemies seeking to weaken him. Gasps rippled through the room. Alexander closed his eyes, the revelation tearing open wounds he had buried beneath duty and pride. The cross-examination was brutal. Lawyers tried to discredit Emma, pointing to her family's ruin, accusing her of bias. Yet Emma stood firm, her hands clenched, her voice carrying the strength of every sleepless night, every trauma she had endured. She was not just defending Alexander, she was reclaiming her own voice, breaking free from years of silence. In that moment, she was no longer just a maid covering her sister's shift. She was a woman standing for truth, for justice, for a child's right to keep her father. When the judge's gavel struck, the decision rang like a bell of deliverance. Alexander retained custody of Sophie. The lawsuit against him unraveled, the evidence Emma provided turning the tide. Relief washed over him in waves, his shoulders sagging as Sophie climbed into his arms, whispering, "We won, Daddy." For once, his tears fell without shame, each drop dissolving years of isolation. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the air smelled of fresh rain, the storm having passed. Emma stood beneath the gray sky, uncertain if she still belonged in their world. But Alexander approached, Sophie clutching his hand, her rabbit dangling from the other. He stopped in front of Emma, his voice unsteady yet filled with conviction. You risked everything, for me, for Sophie. I don't know how to thank you. I only know that losing you now would be the greatest mistake of my life. Emma's eyes burned as she searched his face. The guarded CEO was gone. In his place stood a man stripped bare, a father, a human being who had found light again. Sophie tugged Emma's sleeve. Will you stay with us, please? Emma knelt, pulling the girl into her arms, inhaling the child's scent of soap and innocence. She looked up at Alexander, her voice trembling. If you'll have me, not as a maid, not as a guest, but as someone who believes in you, then yes, I'll stay. The three of them stood together, the courthouse looming behind, the storm clouds breaking to reveal a tender light. A single white flower had fallen from a bouquet discarded on the steps. Sophie picked it up and pressed it into Emma's hand. Emma held it tightly, understanding its silent message. Pain had brought them here, but healing would carry them forward. For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to breathe deeply, to imagine a life not built on fear or loss, but on love resilient enough to withstand any courtroom, any betrayal, any storm. And as the sunlight spilled across their faces, Emma realized that sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised in borrowed aprons, sleepless nights, and the courage to tell the truth. Because justice and love, once found, can never be silenced. In the end, this story wasn't just about a maid's borrowed shift or a CEO's lonely fight. It was about how love, courage, and truth can break through even the darkest storms. Emma and Alexander found not only justice, but also the kind of healing that reminds us we're never truly defined by our past wounds. Their journey shows that sometimes, when we dare to stand for what's right, we discover the family and future we've been longing for all along. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more inspiring tales like this one, and feel free to share your own story of resilience and hope in the comments. Together, we keep the light alive.